about elicited behavior and habituation. And just a warning before you move on, it is expected that you have watched the video on infant reflexes and on the habituation of an orienting response before you proceed with this video lecture. I'll make some references to those videos, so it's important you have seen them. They're short, so if you haven't already, please go to Blackboard where you'll find the links to the YouTube videos and watch them, then come back. Okay, now that you've watched the videos, it's important to talk about the simplest form of behavior, the simplest relationship between a stimulus and response that we can think of. And for that, I'm going to bring back the point that I made in the last video lecture about how when you talk about a stimulus, you're talking necessarily about a stimulus that elicits a response, and when you talk about that response, you should be including as part of the definition of the response the stimulus that elicits that response. So if we're talking about a blinking as a response, we're talking about blinking to something, to a light or to something, and that is how we would provide a complete description, if not detailed, at least complete description of the response. So we referred to that, the way we talked about it was by drawing this S by which we symbolize the stimulus, and that elicits a response R, right? So this is ultimately a response that is elicited by a stimulus without the need of any learning. It's the simplest form of behavior that we can think of, and we call it elicited behavior because the response is simply elicited by the stimulus and no learning is required. Let me move this somewhere else so it doesn't get on the way. Let's put it here. That's it. And there's a number of behaviors that are elicited that require no learning. The infant reflexes that you saw in the video are not learned. The Babinski reflex is a response, is the fanning of the toes and the big toe moving up as a response to a particular tactile stimulation in the foot of the infant. There's no learning involved there. The response happens when that stimulus is presented. Another one that you saw was the orienting response, and also in an infant. The response is moving the attention, the gaze of the infant in the direction of a novel stimulus that appears in the visual field of the kid. Human and animals also show elicited behavior in the form of facial, orofacial responses, so changes in the gestures in the mouth and the face to disgusting flavors. You give a baby a flavor that is not that it's bitter, for instance, and you'll see a particular response that is conserved over over development a little bit, and that response, that facial response, is obviously not learned. And you might be thinking, well, this is also true about this may only be true about infants, and that's it. Well, it's true also about, of course, many other animals. For instance, nematodes, small earthworms. They're not even vertebrates, and they have relatively simple nervous systems, and they too show habituation. If you tap close to them, you see a curling response in the nematode. They curl, and but and that response requires no learning. And finally, my last example, in case you think that that doesn't apply to you or to me or to adults, um, think of your response to a loud, unexpected noise. You shrug your shoulders and you close your eyes and you tense your muscles. All those responses do not require any learning. They happen, they are elicited by the loud, surprising stimulus. Right? Now, so I hope that that concept is clear right there. The fact that there's some responses that require no learning. That's a key issue. Now, when we're talking about habituation, what are we referring to? Well, some of these responses may elicited responses may habituate. By that we mean that if I present repeatedly, let's say I'm going to refer to this now as, well, I present this stimulus repeatedly, so this is time, and I'm presenting the same stimulus over and over and over with the same level of intensity. Try to make those S's about the same size to signify that they are of the same intensity. What we would see with some of the behaviors that I described to you, that I use as an example, you would see that the response becomes weaker and weaker, and eventually you may not even see it. We would say in that situation that the response to that stimulus has habituated. Very important. In one of the videos that you saw, it was said that the organism, the infant, was habituated. The organism doesn't habituate. What habituates is a response to a stimulus. Probably a better way of representing this is similar to the way that you saw it in the video that I showed you before, that you saw before. Move this here, and that is by means of making a graph, and you should be pretty good at doing this now. Let's draw this graph. All right, where you have the magnitude of the response. So we're going to be using the example of the orienting response. So in that case, we are measuring its magnitude in the form of a duration, which must be in seconds, duration of the response, and we have repeated trials in which a stimulus is shown. Each of this represents an individual trial. I forgot what exact scale the duration was, but let's say went up to 30 seconds and down to 0 seconds out here. And what you should see is that with an habituated response is that the first time you present the relevant stimulus, the magnitude of the response, in this example the duration of the response, is pretty high. But as you present the same stimulus over and over, you may see a rapid decline in the duration of, or in the magnitude of, the response. And this is a as you can see, this is a negatively accelerated function of magnitude of response relative to trials. a number of, in each trial there's a presentation of the stimulus. Okay, so let me write down here a definition of what is habituation. Habituation is the reduction in responding due to the repeated presentation of a relevant stimulus. And I want to highlight something here, the due to. It's not just any reduction in responding, it's reduction in responding because of, due to the repeated presentation of a particular stimulus. Moreover, let me erase this part. You don't need it now. Let me move it out of the way rather. This reduction responding is not due to sensory adaptation or motor fatigue. What do I mean by that? I'll discuss sensory adaptation and motor fatigue later on in a later video. But you can think of, for instance, a situation where I present this repeated stimulus over and over and over, and I see a reduction responding because what I did is, through the presentation of that stimulus, I actually compromised the integrity of your sensory motor system. Think of the situation. This is the most extreme situation, of course. The startling response to a surprising loud stimulus. If the stimulus is loud enough, I may affect your hearing. You may not be able to hear again because the stimulus was so loud it damaged your ear. So because of repeated presentation of that loud stimulus, I may see a reduction in responding to that stimulus, but that wouldn't be habituation, because in that situation the sensory system has been implicated and has been compromised. Similarly with the orienting response, if I do this experiment over and over and over, and I see where I present an infant with a repeated stimulus, and that is novel at the beginning, but over repeated trials I see a reduction in the production of this orienting response in the direction of the novel stimulus. One of the reasons why that might happen is because the infant is just fatigued, is just tired of producing that response in a muscular way. Not tired because it's bored, but tired because its motor system is less capable of producing that response, in the same way that we're unable to run 1 more mile after we've run 5 miles. No, it's fatigue in that sense, and that wouldn't constitute habituation. That will be motor fatigue. So I'll discuss in a later video. I'll discuss how we can distinguish between habituation, sensory adaptation, motor fatigue, using the by examining the properties of habituation. But for now, what's particularly important is that you keep in mind that habituation is a reduction in responding that is due to the repeated presentation of a stimulus.